Hey everyone, welcome to Crime Family. This is a tragic case about a family now gone. By all accounts, this young family was a normal Canadian family living in Alberta, Canada. The 8-year-old son was best friends with the little boy next door. The 12-year-old girl was described as bright and social, and the parents were very much in love, having been married for 15 years. This happy, loving family became international news and one of Canada's most horrific family murders. Thanks for joining us. So this case takes place in Medicine Hat, Alberta, which is about 300 kilometers southeast of Calgary, Alberta, and 215 kilometers northeast of the Montana-US border. It has around 63,000 people, so it's a pretty small city here in Canada. This is a Canadian crime, and because of the age of one of the offenders at the time, under Canada's Youth Criminal Justice Act, her name cannot be released. And even as she becomes an adult, because she was convicted, her name is not allowed to be published in her home country ever. And so since we're in Canada, I'm just going to refer to her as JR. And her family members' names have also been changed for this podcast, but the 23-year-old perpetrator's name has not been changed. In the book called Runaway Devil by author Robert Remington, he describes JR as an innocent preteen. Her room was filled with stuffed animals like kittens and unicorns, and she went to a Catholic school, and she apparently made friends really easily. Michael, her 8-year-old brother, was described as very friendly and the class clown. He loved Star Wars and his little pet hamster. Their parents were hardworking and loving parents. So JR was a middle school girl who was discovering the internet and chat rooms in 2006. And thinking back, I can remember when I was that age, or maybe a little older, when I was just discovering MSN and other chat rooms to get together and chat with your friends. In 2006 or 2007, that's when Facebook started to become popular as well. And I can just remember that feeling of being that young and excited, getting together on these platforms. And you didn't even realize back then the dangers that were out there, especially back then when all of this was super new. And you could talk to people that you would never normally talk to, or even people that you would never even have met through these kinds of platforms. So JR frequented a site called Nexopia.com. I had never heard of this site, so I went to go check it out, and it's actually still a thing, but nothing really stood out as too risque on the surface or anything. It just has different topic chat rooms where you can go in and just kind of talk about whatever you want. But there were some allegations that this site and also another site that JR frequented called VampireFreaks.com that had been connected to other cases such as the murder of a 12-year-old in Toronto and also a hit list that originated in Calgary. And this site, Nexopia.com, claims that you have to be at least 15 and have parental permission to join. But even now, there's really no way for a website to adequately check that. And I get the creeps just thinking about some of the people that could be lurking on these sites, waiting to prey on teenage girls and boys and kids. And there's so many stories out there, these kinds of interactions on the internet, and they take a turn for the worst. And in this case, that creepy feeling definitely pans out. So some sources say that JR met a man named Jeremy Steinke at a punk concert, and others say that they were introduced by a friend at a local mall. But either way, Jeremy was 22 or 23 when they met, so that's 10 or 11 years older than JR, and they started connecting through these social media sites and chat rooms. And JR's parents were really dedicated to their kids. They always made a great effort to ensure that they had fun and were really committed to spending as much time as they could together. Jeremy's upbringing, however, was not as happy as JR's, and his early life, sadly, was filled with abuse by his alcoholic father and then by his 2 stepfathers, and bullies at school. His mother was also an alcoholic, and Jeremy started using drugs at age 14. He started with marijuana and eventually mushrooms, and then got into harder drugs like ecstasy and acid. And he had at least 1 suicide attempt by the time he had met JR. So Jeremy was experiencing ridicule at school, and there was likely no relief when he got home. And so probably to help cope with all of this trauma in his life, Jeremy developed a sort of goth persona when he was 13. And this involved him wearing a vial of blood around his neck, and he referred to himself as a 300-year-old werewolf. So when I think of this kind of behavior, I mean, it's definitely odd, but it can be harmless when you're a kid and you're just trying to express yourself. And I mean, growing up, we kind of all knew goth people, and they were completely harmless. And we all know that kids and teens go through these kinds of phases, just trying to figure out their life. And maybe this kind of behavior even seems more normal for a kid who had a troubled home life as well. Even as an adult, because he doesn't really seem to grow out of this phase, this kind of behavior, I guess, can be harmless to a point. Because, I mean, to each their own, you can do whatever makes you happy as long as you're not hurting anyone else in the process. But it's when you start to expose kids to this kind of stuff where it definitely crosses a line. I mean, he was a grown-ass man when he met JR, and they started dating, and she was 12. So, I mean, some sources say that JR lied about her age, and Jeremy thought at first she was 15 or 16, but that's still illegal, and it's still wrong and creepy, so it doesn't do him any favors at all. So JR's parents found out about this relationship, and they tried to shut it down immediately. JR was forbidden from dating Jeremy, which is of course what any responsible parent would do without a doubt, but JR and Jeremy were not going to take no for an answer. Even before meeting Jeremy, JR's personality was drastically starting to change. From the innocent Catholic schoolgirl, she very quickly picked up the goth style that she shared with Jeremy, and once they got together, they kind of fed off of each other even more with these dark and dangerous thoughts. And her behavior changed so much that her parents tried to get them into family therapy and find ways to keep their daughter safe, just trying to figure out what was going on with her. And they tried to monitor her social media accounts and chat rooms as much as they could. And they took her things away, like her hair straightener, her electronic devices, as a form of punishment. But everything unraveled so quickly that there really wasn't time for much to get resolved. So on the vampirefreaks.com website that I mentioned earlier, Jeremy listed his interests as sacrificion, pain, kinky fetishes, blood, and razor blades. And JR described herself as Wiccan, nocturnal, awkward, a deep thinker, and insane. So JR's username on one of these sites was Runaway Devil, and Jeremy went by Soul Eater. And police released some of their messages back and forth. In one message, which was sent on March 13th, 2006, Soul Eater wrote the following to Runaway Devil. You're a sight for sore eyes, and I miss you more than killing people. Can we get together and kill people together? And a week later, Soul Eater wrote again. Payment. My lover's rents are totally unfair. They say they really care. They don't know what is going on, they just assume. He continues to write that JR's parents should get with the program and realize that times are ever changing and they can't stop it. Runaway Devil replied with a message about a plan that she had, and it begins with me killing them and ends with me living with you. And in response to this plan, Soul Eater said he needs a little bit more detail and to get a little bit more creative. And there was another message found on another chat platform from Jeremy about JR's parents, and it said, their throats I will slit. They will regret the shit they have done, especially when I see to it that they are gone. They shall pay for their insolence. Finally, there shall be silence. Their blood shall be payment. So, it's obvious that things are really starting to get intense and scary as their relationship progresses. JR has this feeling that most preteens and teens get, that her parents are really unreasonable and that she needs her space. But obviously, just listening to this back and forth, she's taking it way too far. And this man is egging her on and encouraging this behavior, so they're really feeding off each other. And I want to say that she's a victim in this way, as she's only a child and she's being coerced in a way, and maybe she feels powerful with this man by her side. But some sources seem to suggest that JR was the violent one, and she was equally as disturbed when she had met Jeremy, and it wasn't really his doing that made her this way. So, I mean, they both seem to be kind of really disturbed individuals, and they met each other, and it just evolved into this, really violent storm. What do you guys think at this point?
I think this case is it's not where I expect it to be going, and it's quite disturbing, and, I just don't know. I've never heard anything like it before. It's just very wild to me.
The vial of blood is crazy to me. I can't get over that when you said the vial of blood around his neck. That's, I don't know, that's what stood out to me, and it's just bizarre and creepy.
And yeah, I want to assume that vial of blood is fake blood, but it doesn't really say anywhere, but let's just assume that it's fake for now.
And the fact that these chat rooms still exist is something creepy as well.
When I went on nexopia.com just to check it out, I mean, it seemed like really innocent things what's your favorite thing to do on a Saturday night and things like that. And I think maybe that's just a front, and then once you actually get into the chat, there's more deeper and dark things, and it's probably monitored a lot more now, so these kinds of things don't happen. But there's things for people that, that don't have a lot of friends or family to connect with other people. But yeah, they're definitely used for things they're not supposed to be used for.
Yeah, and it's so, like you said before, it's so hard to regulate that sort of stuff. I mean, the website should be aware of kind of what sort of people are on their platform, but it's just like anything. You can get any type of people on any social media platform, and they can use the platform for really bad things, but the platform itself isn't necessarily the bad thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you could use Facebook chat for something like this too. Obviously, that's regulated quite heavily, but I mean, it's these things that start out innocently that people take to a deeper level. So the book Runaway Devil says that JR and some of her friends were starting to question the religious teachings of their Catholic school, and that JR's belief in God really began to fade. JR was actually very intelligent and was an A student, and she was really attracted to the more intellectual side of the goth culture. I barely know anything about the goth culture, but this lifestyle was enough to make most of her friends drift away from her, and she had to make new friends within this group of goth lovers. This book also goes on to say that JR matured and developed earlier than most 12-year-olds, and studies show that girls who reach puberty early are more likely to be depressed, socially withdrawn, moody, and sexually active, and are also at a higher risk of delinquency. So this could definitely help explain some of that rapid behavior change and changes in her personality that JR was experiencing. On April 23rd of 2006, this is just a few weeks after some of those text messages were exchanged between JR and Jeremy, JR's 8-year-old brother, Michael, he was supposed to have a sleepover with his best friend next door, the little 6-year-old boy that lived next door. Instead of going over to Michael's house for a sleepover, the little 6-year-old was invited to go to a hockey game with his grandmother. And so the next day, the 6-year-old neighbor was excited to play with Michael, but when he called over there was no answer. He saw that their vehicle was parked in the driveway, and he went over there hopeful that Michael would be able to come out and play. He peered into one of the windows that he could reach, which happened to be the basement window, and what he saw inside that house changed him forever. He ran back to his house and said to his mother, quote, "Mommy, there's bodies at Michael's house with blood on them. I saw them through the basement window," end quote. And his mother, of course, realized that this is not something that her 6-year-old son would just randomly make up and say, so she ran over to the neighbor's house to check it out as well. She looked in the window and sees what her son was talking about, and she immediately calls 911. Once the police get there, they find a really horrific scene. And Officer Brent Sekundayak, he was one of the first to arrive, And CBC News reports that he said it took him years to get over the images of what he saw inside that house. They found JR's 42-year-old father lying on the floor covered in blood, and some reports say that he was clutching a screwdriver in his hand. Presumably, this was used to fight off his attackers. He was stabbed to death, and his wife was found behind the couch, and she was stabbed at least a dozen times. They searched the house and found JR's 8-year-old brother upstairs in his room, lying in his blood-soaked bed. He had been stabbed multiple times, and his throat had been slit, and there was blood splatter all over the toys in his room. They continued to search the house, and they saw a family portrait of 4 people, which made them realize that there was another child that lived there, but they didn't end up finding JR in the house, and they initially thought that the perpetrator had kidnapped JR and fled, so an Amber Alert was sent out for the 12-year-old JR. It did not take long for the police to catch up with the reality of the situation. They discovered this digital trail of evidence, like all those messages via email and in the chat rooms, and this made it clear to them that 12-year-old JR very likely had something to do with her family's massacre. Witnesses say that they saw JR and Jeremy laughing and kissing outside a party shortly after the murders, and police ultimately found them in Leader, Saskatchewan, which is about 80 kilometers from Medicine Hat, and they were cuddling in the back of Jeremy's truck. They were both arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. JR originally pled not guilty, and she even made up this whole other story, but eventually she confessed to everything, and Jeremy also pled guilty. So during court proceedings, it was determined that JR and Jeremy had planned the murders so that they could be together, and that it was JR's plan from the very beginning. JR revealed that her little brother Michael pleaded for his life, saying that he was too young to die, and that JR ultimately stabbed him because she thought it would be cruel to leave him without parents. Jeremy finished him off by slitting his throat and leaving him in his room to die. And it was reported that Jeremy was also the one who stabbed both of JR's parents as well. So in the book Runaway Devil, it describes this night in detail, and it really goes into the nitty-gritty of this case. So it says that Jeremy snuck into the house through a window wearing a black hoodie with a knife in the pocket, and he had a neoprene mask covering his face. When he snuck into the basement, JR's mom woke up from the noise and went down to the basement to check it out. And I can just imagine how terrifying it must have been for her to come down there with the lights off and see just Jeremy standing there. He stabbed her and she screamed, which woke up her husband, and he quickly came down to the basement as well. He saw her lying on the floor, and that's when he picked up that screwdriver, and a battle ensued between him and Jeremy. They were fighting, and Jeremy was just slashing wildly at his victim as he came at him, and Jeremy says that JR's dad was pressing his thumbs really hard into his eyes. Eventually Jeremy got away and he tried to run, but JR's dad grabbed him around the neck, and Jeremy just kept stabbing until JR's father could not fight any longer. So when I was researching this case, what came to mind was I was wondering if JR's parents knew that she was involved at all in the attacks. And sadly, according to Runaway Devil, JR's father's last words to his attacker were, "Why?" And Jeremy answered, "'Cause you treat your daughter like shit. It's what your daughter wanted." So those were the last things that he ever heard before he died, which is super sad. Once he finished killing JR's father, Jeremy went upstairs to join JR, and he proceeded to kill Michael as well. So a day after these murders, one of Jeremy's friends recalls Jeremy saying, quote, "We killed my girlfriend's family last night. I gutted them like a fish," end quote. And then JR backs him up by saying, quote, "My little brother gargled," end quote. It was reported as well that JR had told some of her friends prior to this massacre that she was planning to kill her parents, but everybody thought that this was just a joke. And maybe just because of her personality and kind of how dark she was, this wasn't too far off of something that she would say. All of these horrific details were explained in court, and Jeremy is sentenced to life in prison with no parole for 25 years, which is the maximum sentence in Canada for an adult. JR was also sentenced to the maximum for her age, which was 10 years in custody, with credit given to time served leading up to the trial, which was 18 months. In 2016, JR was released from her sentence. she had spent 4 years in a psychiatric hospital and then another 4.5 years under community supervision, which started in a group home and then eventually led to her living on her own with enforced curfews. Now, however, she is completely free of any supervision, and if she stays out of trouble, the charges could be completely removed from her criminal history. She apparently started studying at the University of Calgary and is now living in a secret location in Alberta. Jeremy has appealed his convictions, but has so far not been successful. What are your guys' thoughts so far?
This whole case gives me the chills. Like, I have goosebumps right now. It's so weird, and the fact that she didn't even, like, she's out there right now and living a semi-normal life is crazy to me.
Yeah, and I don't really foresee Jeremy ever getting out of prison. I mean, obviously he's tried to do the appeals process, but I think, from my perspective, my opinion, I feel like he was the mastermind behind it. And I guess obviously there's, debates about that, whether she was just as, involved. Obviously she was, but I think like when she's 12 years old, she's, very easy to influence. And I guess if she was sort of enamored with Jeremy, then maybe she was just so, I don't know, she was infatuated with him. She would do whatever he says. And I think he kind of was able to manipulate her enough so that she would do that. I don't know. I feel like if I was going to place the blame on one of them over the other, it would definitely be him. But, yeah, that's why I don't foresee Jeremy ever getting out, because he was an adult at the time. And I think, it's such a heinous crime that he's probably going to be in prison for the rest of his life. But it's pretty crazy that she got out so quickly, and she's kind of out there living her life, which, I'm all for rehabilitation. So, maybe she's a different person. She's changed. But, yeah, it's just interesting.
Yeah, like, I just can't believe that she was only 12 at the time. Like, that just seems so young to me for someone to be be in a chat room. Just the whole case just seems wild to me, and it's just that she was just so young. It's hard for me to believe that she would actually want to harm her family at such a young age, but we don't know what was going on in her mind, and it's just tragic altogether.
Yeah, and because of JR's age, she was only 12 and she got psychiatric help, and because of that she's doing a lot better. And I'm just kind of sad that Jeremy didn't maybe get that option. I couldn't find any research that said he got psychiatric help. He obviously needed it, but maybe because he was going to spend most of, if not all of his life in jail, that maybe they thought it wasn't worth it. I don't know, I think it's just kind of sad that he had this really shitty upbringing and then his life just never got better after that. Also, I couldn't find anything about him getting extra charges for having a relationship with a minor, which I feel like would happen as well, but that didn't come up at all. When I was researching, I found some thoughts coming out of the community where she grew up and where this happened, and most people seem to be sympathetic and hopeful for her future. So JR, when she was 12, she was diagnosed with oppositional defiance disorder and conduct disorder. Both of these are a mental health disorder. And so that's something she could have gotten treatment for, and it's something that maybe could just explain some of this really erratic behavior. And she is apparently the poster child of rehabilitation. The Court of Queen's Bench Justice Scott Brooker said to JR, quote, "I think your parents and brother would be proud of you. Clearly, you cannot undo the past. You can only live each day with the knowledge you can control how you behave and what you do each day." End quote. So I think he's referring to who she has become, and her parents would be proud of how far she's come in her life. A member of the Medicine Hat community says, quote, "I think we need to give her a second chance because of the age she was. The thing that I most think about is how she will continue on with her life, with that being a part of her past. I have sympathy for her, but you can't imagine anybody doing something like that," end quote. And other people in her community think that if you're old enough to do the crime, then you are old enough to do the time. I mean, hopefully she's learned her lesson and she's an improved citizen. Others feel that she shouldn't return to her old community out of fear for her safety. I mean, if anybody finds out who she is or where she lives, she could be in real danger. Some people say she tarnished our community and hurt a lot of people. Some people believe that because of her age and her treatment, that it's absolutely possible for her to have changed and one day become a positive member of the community. Even Jeremy, he's changed his name, and I mean, if he gets parole, he could be around 50 when he gets released, which is still possible, and he could still turn his life around. So, do you guys have any final thoughts before I wrap it up?
I do hope she is having a normal life, and the fact that she was so young at the time when this whole thing happened, she still has to live with what she did. But I hope that she gets some help, and hopes that she'd be able to just move on and just try to move forward, basically, and not really forget what she did, but just the past is in the past. And yeah, I just hope she has a good life.
Yeah, I mean, she's like, she can start over, and you know, she's so young too when she gets out of, you know, when she gets out of custody, so she still has a whole life ahead of her, and it'll just be, I don't know, it's crazy though that, like, you know, in Canada her name wasn't, you know, released to the public, and it was changed, so no one really knows who she is, which is a good thing. Obviously, you don't, for her own sake, because, you know, she can't go on living where everyone knows exactly who she is and what she did, so it's like she gets a brand new life in a way. But I feel like anything short of witness protection, like, she has to go into full, like, change her whole identity, because that's still always going to be a part of her and going to be associated with her, especially in that community and in the surrounding areas. So it's best for her to probably just go full on witness protection and just live a whole new life, basically, outside of the community and outside of anyone that she knew prior. Yeah,
and even though her name's protected in Canada, you can Google this case, and I mean, you could even just type in like JR Medicine Hat murders, and American sites, Australian sites come up, have her name, her full name, her family's name, her picture, her family's pictures. So, I mean, she's really not anonymous or protected in that way. Because, I mean, maybe back in 2006 when this happened, it was much easier to keep that hidden from the world. But now it's definitely out there. People know who she is, what she looked like. So, yeah, it's probably, if she hasn't changed her name by now, she probably should. But I don't know. Yeah, it says she is living in Alberta still, but, you know, maybe she's living in the same community. Maybe people have welcomed her back, forgiven her, because, I don't know, people are more resilient than you give them credit for.
Yeah, and just to think, like, it's crazy to me how, you know, a 12-year-old, like, the crime was so heinous and it was so violent. It's just wild to think that somebody as young as 12 could actually be responsible for doing something like that. And of course it was under his influence as well, or, you know, 50-50. But to me, that's just the most striking thing. It's like how violent and just horrible it was for someone that young to even have thoughts like that, and like actually being able to commit a crime like that is pretty wild to me.
Yeah, and it's crazy to think that you can do something like this, and then to think that people can leave it in their past and move on, right? Like, I mean, you obviously will be reminded of this every day when you don't have a family anymore. Your parents, your brother is gone, and that's because of you. But somehow now, I don't know, now that you're an adult, you just move on and you get over it in a way where you can actually function normally in society. So I just wonder how you know, you can function on a regular basis knowing that was your past.
Yeah, and it will be hard to know exactly, like, for sure, if she truly does regret her actions. I mean, you can hope she does, but you really never know. And it'd be, yeah, like you said, hard to go through waking up every day knowing that you killed your entire family, and, you know, you can't go back now. What's done is done, and you just have to go forward. But I just feel like that, how could it not weigh on your mind every single day that you were capable of doing something like that, especially to your family?
Yeah, and when I was researching, it did say, like, when she was going through her hearings to get released from custody, that she really didn't show any remorse, or she didn't apologize for what she did. She just kind of thanked the judge for his words and thanked for being let out. So it'd be interesting if she eventually does kind of break the silence and talks about her past and where she is now. It'd be interesting to see if something comes out of this.
It would be interesting to hear what she has to say now and reflecting on those actions. But I think for her, obviously, it's going to be just in her best interest. She just wants to move forward, doesn't want to be associated with it, wants nothing to do with it, even though she's going to carry it around with her every day. But I don't think we can expect any sort of public acknowledgement of this from her.
Maybe she should, if she is living in the same little village as she committed the crime in, I think maybe her best option would be to, like, move away from that area, or Alberta altogether, because there could be some people out there who are out to get her, and like for her safety, she should go somewhere where nobody really knows her. She was young at the time, and hopefully that she can be rehabilitated and get back on her feet and try to move on. But it will be hard, that's for sure.
Do you think that had she not met Jeremy, that any of this would have happened? Because in my mind, I feel like it's so crazy to think that if she had not gone on that website and she hadn't been introduced to him in that way, maybe none of this would have happened. And it's sad to think that just that small little event led to all of this.
Yeah, that's what I was actually thinking too. Like, if she never did meet him, like, none of this might not have happened. But she was a troubled little 12-year-old.
Like, I think,
We don't know.
yeah, she was a troubled 12-year-old, but you have that. And then when you add to it this guy, Jeremy, who is going to, feed off of that and like prey on that, basically, it was kind of just a horrible combination. Whereas like, she was troubled without him, but if she got the proper intervention, something like this could have been avoided. And obviously she didn't get the proper intervention because she met him, and look where it led.
Yeah, and a lot of the research that I did, kind of put her as the instigator. It was her plan, and she was the kind of one pushing this forward. And it is unfortunate that she met somebody like Jeremy who was willing to carry this out with her. And when I was researching, it did say that he approached some of his friends, like multiple people, asking for help murdering JR's parents. And everyone, of course, was like, no, like, there's no way that's happening. I'm not helping you. Nobody ever reported anything that he was saying to them. But I mean, yeah, it's definitely like a unique person that you would find that would help you with this kind of thing. So it is unfortunate all these circumstances just kind of came together into like the perfect storm.
And you also have to think about the people who, like, the neighbors who found the dead bodies, like the 6-year-old boy and his parents. Like, that's something you can't unsee. You always think about that time when you found your neighbors dead in their basement. Like, that's just something no 6-year-old should ever have to deal with in their lifetime.
Yeah, and I did read that the little boy who did find them, he was only 6, and he still has like psychological problems today because of that, which I can imagine anybody would.
Yeah, that would be like a traumatic event or a traumatic image to have in your mind, and I don't think that's really something you would ever really truly get over. You take a lot of help in your later life to get over that, because it is pretty horrific. So when you think about it, it's not just like the family themselves who all died and JR and Jeremy whose lives were affected. It was those other people too that were involved or a part of this story.
Yeah, so it's something that's going to be a part of, Medicine Hat's history for a long time. A really unfortunate and tragic part of its history. And so with that, I guess we're going to wrap it up. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Crime Family. We'll be back next Wednesday with a brand new episode. Please don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite podcast streaming app. That way you're notified as soon as we release a new episode. Give us a rating on your favorite podcast app as well. You can find us on Instagram at Crime Family Podcast. You can also find us on Twitter at Crime Family Pod 1. And the amazing music that you're hearing throughout the podcast was done by the awesome Tim Monis. So if you like what you hear, you can follow him on Instagram at Tim Monis. See you next time. Thanks for listening.